Hello, Auntie Noreen.
Hello there, my nephew Vince.
Welcome back. We are here. We left off the last time we were together. We took a little break in between. We were talking about your life in Ireland and growing up in Ireland and then coming to the United States. And Chicago was where we kind of left it off. And we talked about your family and your relations and where you came from and growing up in the time that you did. And we left the second half of your life, if you want to kind of call it that, your Western life, right? In California up for today's story, and that's what
really
gets us here. I wanted to ask a few things, just more philosophical things that I thought about after our last get together, specifically about your mother, Agnes. And I just remember her. She at the end of her life wasn't a very healthy woman, really, right? I mean, I always remember being in bed when we were there visiting.
She was stricken with severe osteoarthritis.
Yeah.
Her hips and her knees, which rendered her walking very precarious. And I had left when she took to the bed, as they say, and she spent many years in bed. You just could barely get out of it, and it was arthritis really was the killer.
And she stayed in the original house there on Main Street with Marty and the family.
Her bed was set up in what used to be called a dining room.
Yeah.
And she was happy there,
So how long was she in that condition? Was it 20 years?
A number of years, at least 5 or 6 or maybe more.
5 or 6, yeah.
Maybe more.
After.
It was after my father died, you see.
Okay.
The dates now escaped me.
Right.
But she was up and going, and I remember at his funeral, she was up and going. And I had left home. I was out in this hemisphere when she really started to stay in bed.
Right. But she seemed to still kind of run the show there from her.
She was very happy, and she could give the orders, and she could give her opinion on matters, and she wasn't uncomfortable.
Right. She was an opinionated woman, though, wasn't she?
She certainly was. When I remember one of the first times I came home, the question was, we'd go down to town, we'd go down to O'Hara's.
Yeah.
Your namesake, but not your cousin's, for a drink. And she said to me quietly, lady doctors don't go into pubs.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of the rule in those days anyway, right? I mean,
I don't know if it ever was.
But she must have been proud of you to have the lady doctor come home, but she didn't want you seen in the pub.
Maybe that's really why she said it,
It was the image of it, really.
Lady doctors don't go into pubs.
What was her personality like? Was she bubbly and outgoing?
She was a very joyous woman.
Yeah.
She really was. And all of her friends in Foxford were young women. There were young women who would come to work in the post office. Bright young women. And somehow or other they always came, because I remember they would come and they would sit together in as we called it, the front room, so they could look out on the street and see the passers-by. Should I be looking directly at you, Vincent,
That's
or back
fine.
and forth?
Yeah, back and forth. Yeah, back and forth.
Yes, she had a lot of friends like that, I remember, and they enjoyed her, and she talked their language. She was not an old person in her way, up to the time she died.
Young in
spirit. She was very much in touch with, and she'd use, modern language where a lot of people wouldn't.
Where did she get that? Was she...
From being around us, really.
Yeah.
She was an intelligent woman.
But you said she didn't really have any formal education.
She just had basic education. She could write, she used to write me nice letters when I was in boarding school. She didn't write much after that. When I was in college, she didn't write to me.
How did you communicate then after you'd come to the United States? Was it frequent? And I guess it was letters, really, in those days.
Letters. There wasn't much in the way of phone calls even then in the 50s.
Yeah.
It was mostly letters.
And did you communicate frequently? I know you kept in touch, but how did you keep the relationship, I guess, going?
Well, I think it was by letters and letting her know what exactly was going on here, and as each child was born. And then we went quite often. We went every 2 or 3 years.
Sure, yeah.
Which might not be often in some people's eyes, but for young people, starting a family and everything, it's not easy to fly to Europe that often. But we went at least every 2 to 3 years.
Yeah. That was home to you?
That was home.
Do you consider it still to be home in your heart? I mean, what is it? No. This is home.
Don't forget my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren are here.
Right. I just wonder if you look at your life, like, I have a hard time even defining that. What is home? It's where your heart is, of course, and where your family is. It's where your people are,
right.
ultimately.
And it's also where you are right now, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's conditional, isn't it? I remember going to Ireland probably 8 or 10 years ago when Uncle Vincent met me initially, and he said, "Welcome home, Vincent," to me, you know, and I was proud of that notion, but the idea that this was my home, really, you know, it was where I was from, but it was unique observation of it. Welcome home, you know.
Expression, yeah.
Although I had it happen once, I checked into through customs in Dublin, and
say welcome home.
And they said welcome home because my birth certificate says Castle Bar.
That was always so nice.
Yeah.
The man would say welcome home. I think that was beautiful.
Yeah. Well, there's
immediately, you know, touched you.
Right. Well, there's a pride in that, isn't there, to be from Ireland? We
used to have a joke. Tara, my Tara, especially remarked this when we would go home when I was bringing the kids, and she would walk down the street and somebody would walk up and say, "Welcome home. When are you going back?"
Yeah.
That was
typically
2 questions
Irish.
in one.
Yeah.
They want, you know, how long are you staying?
Yeah.
When are you going back?
Well, that was my mother's way too. She'd always ask that when we were visiting. It was really more not so much we're rushing to get you out of here, but how long are you going to be here, so we can plan
to enjoy the extent of the visit.
Plan the time and frame up the party and the celebration. Really, you know, it was probably a rare thing to have Americans coming into Foxford. You were probably the only ones.
I don't remember too many people.
Yeah.
Probably when we were kids, there were people coming in the island, but. You would have thought right after the war. It wasn't long after the war, you know, the World War II. But I don't remember a whole lot of families coming. No, I do not.
Right. Well, and you had a reason to go, so your family was there and still there, really, in a lot of ways. So your mother, we talked a little bit about it, but I wanted to delve a little bit more into your spirituality because I know you're quite a religious person, at least have been from my experience with you. And tell me about your belief system and how that came about and how you've maintained it and held on to it through your life.
It began, Vincent, I have to give credit where credit is due. It began in my early childhood, and that's because I was educated by the nuns.
Mm-hmm.
It was a local Catholic school, St. John's National School. And really, I got it. And I also got it from my mother. Mm. And then I had a person who adopted me more or less up the street. Her name was Mrs. Kennedy. I used to call her Kenny. She was deeply religious. She had no children. And I remember, one of the first things I remember about going into her home, probably a little girl of 3, when I could toddle up the street. And she had a statue of Our Lady of Lourdes, which is a distinct statue. Fatima is a distinct statue. And we would pray together. Mm. This was powerful.
At age 3.
You know, a mother with other children didn't have the time to be like that.
Right.
But she had the time. And she had this quiet little room. She had a small house. And she was a woman who would go off in the evening, go down to the convent chapel to pray. And I was so fond of her that I wouldn't go home from her house until she returned.
Right.
And many times I'd go to the door looking to see was she coming back. Mm. I have memories of this. That was deep stuff.
And it stuck with you through all the thick and thin. I mean, did you ever, with all of the trials and tribulations of life, whatever they are, I mean, we all have them. Did you ever waver from it, or
no? Yeah. It was a backup for me.
Yeah.
You know, Portugal is, for many years, he was a seeker, and he constantly asked questions. And indeed, a lot of times he would tell me, I remember very early on him telling me before I read the Bible, you know, he said there would be no Catholic church, but we wouldn't really have a church if it weren't for St. Paul. Mm. That had never hit my mind before because you didn't question it. Mm. But it's all true, you know. Mm. St. Paul and all that.
But he was intellectual about it, really.
He was, yes.
He thought maybe too much about it.
I remember, he did. He thought too much about it. But he didn't attend church regularly in his later years. Did not. And I don't know why that exactly was. I mean, it wasn't that going to church was not a good thing. He would remind me during the week, he would say to me, "Are you going to mass tonight?"
He supported you. Yeah.
All the way.
He knew it was important to you, right? Is that where, so in the times of tribulation and stress, is that where you found you said it was your backup? I mean, would you say that was...
Which I still do.
That was your, say, maybe drug of choice?
That was my drug of choice.
Yeah. I mean, I was just wondering how you dealt with, all having the kids and a career and a new country and all these things.
Not easy.
How you dealt with that, call it stress and anxiety, that's the big thing these days.
I was blessed in many ways. Podgy was unique. He really was, as a father and as a husband. There was never any question about, we both handled every situation.
Right.
There was never a question of don't rope me into that. You hear that sometimes. He was never one to say don't rope me into it. He wanted to be in it.
You were partners in it.
Every situation.
Yeah.
Whether it was their schooling or they're going to church or anything, he was in there. So that was helpful. And then I was blessed in later years to have, as everybody knows, Dottie.
Right. Well, we'll talk about
I got her
yeah.
by pure accident, and I mean, she was with me for the best part of 30 years.
Right.
That's a story.
Well, let's talk about that. So, how did that relationship start? What was
she
the time?
She came to me after. Let's see, who was here? Tara and Patty were here before Reenie was born. She came.
So you moved. Let's just set the timeline here. You moved from Chicago to California. Podgy had a job offer out here, I think, is where we left it.
Yes, that's right. He had been with the Air Force, and and was working with people who were involved with people out here. And of course, it was again 1950, right after the war, when the airspace was starting to go, going strongly. And he was moved by them. They paid all his expenses to move out here, and so we did. Of course, I wasn't. We had no children then. Mm-hmm. We had lost a child. Yeah, we had the baby that was born with a diaphragmatic hernia, which is incompatible with life. And as soon as the cord was cut, it was obvious she wasn't able to breathe. The cord was cut. She was getting her oxygen from me. And when the cord was cut, there was no oxygen. I remember the obstetrician baptizing her. It's a very sad situation, Colin, that. And I said to my husband, there's something wrong with the baby. And there was very little humanity about it. A Catholic hospital. They just wheeled me off, and I had to learn later. I didn't want to know the diagnosis then, but I wanted to know, what was going on. And I remember he always told me, maybe I shouldn't put this in public view, but he always told me, which is kind of sad for him, that they put the baby on a blanket, on a stand of some kind, and walked away and left him standing there looking at this dead baby.
Wow.
That was Mercy Hospital, Chicago.
And that was a little girl.
It was a little girl.
So,
and she was named Patricia after your mother.
Could it have been handled better by the hospital, or was this one of those things?
Oh no, this was in Mercy Hospital.
Yes, but there wasn't anything.
And it was, nowadays it's diagnosed before birth with ultrasound.
Yeah. So they could have done something had they known in advance.
But there was no ultrasound then, not much in the way of routine. You have no idea. She was perfectly healthy in every respect.
Right.
Except for this, you know what I mean by it? She had half of her diaphragm had not developed. So all the organs in the abdomen came up into the abdomen, pushed on her heart. Couldn't breathe. She didn't have adequate lung capacity. Plus the fact that it, impinged on the heart.
So that was a big test on your relationship and your...
Somebody who was a great comfort to me then, and to Podgy, of course, and had been a great support of ours, was Father Pat McGuinness, his uncle. I remember after I came home, and I was in the middle of a residency, mind you, then.
In Chicago, right.
I was in a pediatric residency, but I stayed home for a couple of weeks. And I remember going to Father Pat's place in Michigan, and he was like a parent to us.
Yeah, right.
He was tremendous. And I remember he had a most wonderful housekeeper, beautiful human being. These things just don't happen, Vincent.
Right.
To run into that kind of situation, I will never forget it. It was very comforting to me. It lessened my my sadness after that
Sure.
birth. Then I came back after that, and after a few weeks I went back into my residency, and that was therapeutic too.
Right.
I got to thinking about what I was learning.
Well, you got busy, you got active, and yeah. So you finished your residency in Chicago then, and then
finished my residency, and it was winter time, and then we got in the car and drove to California.
Oh, you drove out.
Yeah, it was the first of the year, which was a bad time to be traveling. But I remember the last night I had in the hospital, I was with some of the doctors, and I remember the pumping music was playing Arrivederci Roma. Arrivederci, you know, I remember it so well.
Yeah.
I'm talking, how many years am I talking?
Oh, 60,
nearly
70
years.
Yeah. It's interesting the things you remember. Music, right? That kind of, but it hit that moment, didn't it? It was kind of defined
Roma.
it.
I'll never forget it.
Amazing. Of all the things to remember that. Well, were you excited and kind of happy to be moving?
Yeah, I
on?
was. I was young and I was healthy, and so was Podgy. And we had a lovely trip. And I remember staying at the on the way out at the the big park. What's the one nearest here? The
Grand Canyon, or
Grand Canyon, exactly,
yeah.
and other places. But I always remember the Grand Canyon trip. And then we arrived in LA, and there was smog to beat the band.
Yeah, you'd never seen smog before.
Never seen smog before. Downtown LA, I'll never forget. It was awful. But you know, you get used to it.
Yeah. Well, you adjust.
I never heard the term smog until then. But you sure saw there was a pall over Los Angeles. Now this was in 1950.
Yeah. It's gotten better since then, amazingly.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Started getting better right away.
Yeah.
Rules and regulations came into play, which made it less likely we'd be buried in smog.
Yeah.
And then, what did I first do when we came to
Were you in Pomona or somewhere?
Yeah. First thing I did was, I had arranged before I left the Midwest to do something in the way of hospital. I wanted to get to know California and to know about medicine in California. So I got an appointment at Children's Hospital LA.
Good for you.
In pediatric pathology, which in itself wasn't bad. I mean, it wasn't dealing on the floor with it, but I was down in the path lab looking at pathology slides, which was educational. But I'll always remember one of the first times I was there, and they taught me to do autopsies. So I would autopsy children, babies, or whatever. It was all it was children. So one time a child was brought in, deceased, who had been playing in the orange fields in California. See, that was new to me. Well, I did my post, opened the chest, took out the organs, took parts of them, and went through it, you know. I had learned it. They had taught me a few weeks before. And then this is on a weekend, on a Saturday. And on Monday morning, I got the call from the head of the department. He had a Irish kind of name. And to tell me this was really a coroner's case, because the child had drank orange juice, and she was playing in the orange fields, and she had drank orange, something that was contaminated with the disinfectant they used in the orange fields. And she was poisoned.
Poisoned, yeah.
So I don't know what else they had to do, but I had taken parts of all the organs anyway, so they had enough evidence.
Yeah.
That it wasn't anything that was serious. I mean, that was planned or.
Yeah. So why would you? Oh, because that was a suspicious death.
That was a coroner's case.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that.
Right. Well, it sounds. I mean, to me, like a kind of grueling work and challenging work. It's just.
It was nice. I enjoyed that.
But you had a nice basis for your foundation for your start in California, right? And Pajin was working in the aerospace industry.
He was working, well, at that time he was working with a construction company first. It was a construction company, as he was sort of what he called himself a structural engineer.
Right.
And he was working within that capacity. And that's where it's from there he got drawn to the Air Force. The Air Force had this construction company doing work for them on the missile sites. And he got to know friends, Al Fine was one good friend. And from there, then he became a civil servant working with the Air Force as a structural engineer, which took him into the space division.
What was your social life like then? It seemed like you had a lot of Irish friends that somehow
I was so busy, Vincent, that my social life was at a minimum.
Right.
But I always remember somewhere along the line we were in an apartment house, and it was very hard to get apartments in those days. But there was a couple by the name of Duggan, which is an Irish name.
Sure.
And Dad used to call her Mary Duggan, if that was not her name, but they were a lovely American couple. He was a graduate of Notre Dame and they lived downstairs from us. And, you know, we never actually socialized with them, but we were neighbors.
Right.
Because I didn't have time.
Right.
Then we did some socializing with some of his friends. He had some very good friends who were natives of the city of Chicago. And he kept up with them for a long time too after that. But you know, all things pass. Right.
Well, it's life. Keep moving forward, but you didn't really have time to be. I was going to say to be alone or lonely. You were busy working, and
there was no loneliness then.
Yeah.
I've made up for it since.
Well, and you had your mate with you, which is helpful. You had your husband, and
I had my
that
mate.
Was your social.
Right,
that was your
right,
social life. So then
we left Chicago. The city of Chicago really we liked.
Yeah.
Why did we leave then? Well, apart from the fact that he was called by fate to come to Chicago, it was very. I remember I was working as part of my residency. I was in a little hospital in the side of Chicago. It was part of UC Chicago.
University of
whatever
Chicago.
Hospital is associated, and it was called La Rabida, which is some Spanish name for something. Anyway, it was a place where I could go and I didn't have to stay at night. I could come home. One night in the winter time, I came home in my car, driving up to where we lived, the near north side, and there was a thaw, and the outer drive, you know, a freeway. It was slippery, and all of a sudden, I felt the car being taken like this from me, turned to one side. And I could see the oncoming car. I thought, this is it. I'm going to be crashed into. Because of the thaw made it more slippery. Well, I survived that one. But that had a factor in our decision too. The traffic and the weather.
Yeah.
That had a decision.
The close call.
So long ago. Yeah. So long ago.
Well, but these are the things that influence and alter your destiny and your path in life, right? These little things that
it was meant to be.
At the moment, you don't realize what the impact it has, right? But we also talked about Paul Jean being enamored with California, and I think it seemed to me like he was destined to be here.
When he was a young lad in Ireland, he used to watch James A. Fitzpatrick would come on the radio,
right?
And he would be talking. He would describe California, and Paul Jean used to be able to quote him. And you always remember James A. Fitzpatrick's description of California.
Yeah.
And
so that planted the seed.
I think Pascal was here before we came.
Oh, was he?
I think so. I think he was in the seminary. And I remember Father Pat saying, well, you won't go any farther west than California. You won't go any farther west than... First, I landed in New York, then Chicago, then Los Angeles.
That was the last stop.
You're not going to go any more now.
Yeah.
Not going to go any farther. But I think Pascal was here in the seminary while we were still in Chicago. Yes, I'm sure.
Okay. And then when was Bob here or no? When did he arrive?
Bob started out in New York.
Oh, right.
And he then came to, I shouldn't reiterate the story, but he arrived on our doorstep and we had a one-bedroom
I remember that. We talked about that.
We talked about that. I hope we're not repeating ourselves.
Well, we might be, but that's okay. It's good stuff. Part of the story.
Arrived, and not alone did he arrive, but he had a friend, one named...
That was in Chicago.
Aidan Nealon, that was Chicago.
Aidan Nealon, right. But was he on his way to California, or no, he just stopped thinking he was going to stay in Chicago?
He had moved from New York City, where he had met his wife, to California. And he got a job in a clinic called Corbett Clinic, and remember the Corbett, the boxer.
And he was a doctor at the time, right? Or
He was a physician. Yeah, he had graduated in Ireland a year before I did, actually. But he was in England first, as I was. And I think we talked about my little sojourn in England. You know, after I graduated from medical school, the first thing I did was go over to England, and I was there for the better part of a year. Firstly in hospital, and then I decided, I could work for a general practitioner. The health system had that famous universal coverage had started in England, and it was great for the people. Still is, I think. And where was I now, Vincent? I was telling you.
You were there for a year.
I worked with Dr. Ogilvy. He was a Scotsman, and he was a Scotsman. I won't tell you anymore. And so I worked there for. One thing about me, I'll have to say this, Vincent. I made myself busy.
Right.
I never took time out and said, I'm not going to do this.
You didn't have what you would call downtime.
No. And I wanted to be moving ahead, and so I worked with Ogilvy for a while. First I was in a hospital. What did they call me? They called me a registrar or something.
Well, what was your drive, though? Where did that come from? You just had it?
Yeah.
You're just motivated to go.
I was motivated, Vincent. I, honest to God, I'm wondering now how or why.
Well, it's genetic. It has to be. It's part of your personality.
It took emotion. It took I had to be emotionally charged about this whole thing. I had some lovely times there. I remember first little hospital in Chicago was St. Joseph's, and that's the first time I remember seeing. Yes, after we got married, we moved to Chicago. Podgin was working with this company at the time, which was the construction company, and this nice man, I'll never forget him, said, my doctor's name is O'Malley. And he says we have a great need of interns. They were all had gone to the war. You know, there was a dearth of doctors for the hospitals. He talked to somebody at the hospital. His doctor's name was O'Malley. He talked to someone at St. Joe's, and I went over for an interview, hired on the spot as a lowly intern. I mean, I was just child labour in a way. But it was kind of a happy time, I remember, St. Joe's. Well, and I was then Dr. Howley. Keep in mind. And I remember working there and I'd have to stay there every other night. So I was 36 hours on, 12 hours off. I would work day that night and part of the next day.
Were you working in pediatrics then, or just in general? Yeah. But you had trained as a pediatrician, or
after this is internship.
Okay.
This is just the beginning.
Right.
And I remember a lovely Jewish man by the name of Art. That's his first name. After I had graduated from the pediatrics 2 years later, he invited me into his practice on Michigan Avenue.
Wow.
You know, if I had done that, our lives would have taken a whole different turn.
Sure.
But it didn't appeal to me somehow. Michigan Avenue didn't appeal to me. It was a wonderful offer.
Well, he saw something in you, obviously.
Right? He did. We clicked.
Yeah.
And I remember there were two men in charge of the hospital. One was Fitzgerald and the other was like O'Brien or something. I couldn't stand them.
Really?
They were bossy. They didn't give me any feeling of appreciating me. And here this lovely Jewish doctor took me on.
Yeah, interesting.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Wasn't that interesting, Vincent?
Yeah.
Shafton was his name. Arthur Shafton.
Amazing, you remember that.
I will never forget it.
Did you have any possibility of keeping in touch with those people, or as you travel through life, like you said, you just kind of
keep
Vincent,
rolling? You get busy, you're too involved with what you're doing. Yeah. That was kind of selfish too, and that was not.
Well, I understand it. I mean, I have the same experience, and I often think about
everybody does,
you move on through life, and
yeah,
it takes a lot of effort and time.
Yes, I remember Paul used to say that about his experiences, how he would have liked to have kept up with some of the people he met in his early life, but you get too involved. You're just busy, earning a livelihood and advancing yourself. You know.
Well, did you find it harder and harder then to have those close relationships as you traveled through your life? I mean, it was.
It didn't really become easy until I was here in California, and then it did. I had many friends. I remember when I was the doctor when I was in the children's hospital. making friends with nice people. But then they would move, I would move.
It was all work related too, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So when did you arrive then in Manhattan Beach and kind of settle into the beach lifestyle, as you call it?
I have to rethink this, Vincent. So now I've moved from Chicago, and I had got the job at Children's Hospital. Then the next step after the while I'm at Children's Hospital, I had heard of Kaiser Permanente. Now you know who they are. Well, lo and behold, they hired me. Kaiser Permanente. I was with them a year working in pediatrics. I passed by the residency at the University of Illinois. I've skipped that now. I've gone on a step further, but I'll stay with the step I'm at. Kaiser Permanente were looking again. There was a need for people, and they were looking for me. And the place they wanted me to go was not up on Wilshire Boulevard, where they have the big hospital, Sunset Boulevard near Children's, but out in Fontana. Well, Fontana was one side of the freeway, so to speak, and Paul had a job on the other side of East Los Angeles. So I'm working in Fontana, he's East Los Angeles, so we got an apartment in Pomona.
You split, was that a split the difference? Yeah.
We lived, I was halfway from my work, he was halfway from my work. And that, I was there for a year. But before that, I should have told you that this is all about me, and it's not supposed to be all about me.
Well, who's it supposed to be about, me?
It's supposed to be about the family.
No, we're not. Well, we're working up to that. We'll get there.
We'll get there.
You're the only one who can tell these stories, so we're happy to hear them,
And the kids probably never heard these stories either. There wasn't time to be telling them.
Yeah.
And if Podging were here, he would be interjecting and telling me, don't you remember this and don't you remember that? And probably contradicting me all the way. But before the Fontana and the what did I call it? The
Pomona.
No, but the people, the name of the company.
Oh, Kaiser.
Kaiser. I had to go through the. Well, I did the internship in Chicago at the University of Illinois. And I remember the doctor who was the head, Sanderson was his name, who was the man who hired me who took me on as a resident, said, he said, as I listened to, he had just come back from Ireland, although he wasn't an Irishman by any means, but he said to me, your voice reminds me so much of the nice girls on the airplane.
Wow.
And I remember Tara saying to me, he was patronizing you. But he wasn't. I took it as a nice thing to say. Yeah, I thought it was a nice thing. I had my Irish accent, which I still do today. And the girls on the airplane are usually nice, as I remember them.
Sure.
So I think he was very nice too. Anyway, I was 2 years in Chicago, and I told you about the last night of that residency when I listened to the music coming in, Arrivederci Chi Roma.
Yeah.
And leaving Chicago and driving through the Grand Canyon. I'm repeating myself.
That's okay. We're just refreshing all of it,
And, now you asked me, now we're up to Manhattan Beach. Okay, left Kaiser. The end had come in sight. The other baby had died. And Tara was born. And Tara was actually born she was born downtown LA. But the doctor who took care of her for me was a fellow doctor at the Kaiser. No, not the Kaiser.
Children's or
where I was in the doctor I was working. Yes, I think. No, I mixed up. Anyway, when we arrived in Manhattan Beach, Tara was with us. And I always remember worrying so much about a babysitter. Also wondering, now what do I do?
Right.
Now what do I do? I have all this experience behind me. So I decided then to open my practice. And that was not easy.
That's a big step.
Find a place to build it up, get all the equipment in Manhattan Beach, and there was a group of 3 doctors, I knew them well, who would be my opposition. But I worked up a little practice in Manhattan Beach, in that city, the same cities we were living in. And we were there for until I moved to the hill here.
Right.
I forget how many years that was. I think it must have been at least two years in Manhattan Beach. Because I remember the question rose, would the people in Manhattan Beach come all the way up the hill? No, they would not. Nobody came up the hill in those days.
Right.
Hawthorne hadn't been burst through.
Right.
It ended up here somewhere. And so I was happy enough in Manhattan Beach. It was a nice little practice. And I remember getting a babysitter for Tara, and there was fun in it and there was work in it. And a lot of worry. But we came to...
what did you worry about?
Well, that everything would be taken care of, and that the baby would be taken care of, and how much I could be away from her and all that.
That was unusual, really, in that era to be away from your child, right? It was everybody... The model was stay home, raise your kids, right? So you were a pioneer in that respect.
It certainly was. Yeah. It was. It wasn't easy, Vincent, no. But, I'm brainstorming as you talk to me, because, if I had weeks to sit down and think this through and have it on paper, it would come out more fluently. Yeah. But I'm reaching as I talk to you. Anyway, the word got out that there was going to be a medical practice, a medical building on top of the hill. I moved on it right away. I did get some insight from somebody, and I applied to be one of the tenants. And that's where I landed. That's where I began and ended up, so to speak. What year did I move to the hill? It had to have been just before 1960. I was there when the twins were born. I was there when Reenie was born.
In Palos Verdes?
Patty, I was in Manhattan Beach when Patty was born.
Okay.
But I was living in Manhattan, and I had a practice on Deep Valley Drive, and we had the home over here where Tara now lives.
Yeah.
And
so that was really...
What year would that have been, Vincent?
Well, it would have had to have been early to mid-60s, right?
Yes, I think it is. I remember Reenie being born.
Well, Reenie would be 62.
And she was born in 62, like you were. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And then the twins were born in Maui after that. All of them were raised over there on Rue Langlois.
Right.
And
so that was 62. I mean, you're a native Californian when you really get down to it. You've been here your lifetime, really.
Yeah. And I came here in 55.
Right.
It was about the mid-50s.
Yeah.
Mid-50s when I came to California.
Oh, to California was mid-50s. And then when did Dottie enter into the picture?
Oh, yes.
Go there?
Well, we were talking about the miracle of Dottie. Somebody told me, I got by word of mouth, that there was a certain woman who was a black woman from Alabama who was wanting to come to some relatives in California, and she would love to work with the family. So I decided to look into it. Then I heard that a certain doctor's wife, a doctor I knew well, in fact he was Paul Jean's doctor, a lovely man, I forget his name, it'll come to me. And she wanted Dottie in the worst way, but the time was not just right for her. So Dottie fell to me. Here was this beautiful woman, and she did turn out to be a beautiful woman. I mean, when I say turn out, I mean I got to know her as a beautiful woman. I got in touch with her and her sister, and she came to visit me just before Reenie was born. And we immediately clicked, and Paul Jean clicked with her. And I have to claim, we loved her and she loved us. And our neighbours loved her. I had a neighbour, Ruth Camerly, whose husband was a fellow physician. Lovely people. And Ruth Camerly was crazy about Dottie, and they would want to take her to lunch and all this. And she came to me, and she was with me the best part of 30 years.
Well, that was part of her destiny.
She took such good care of the kids. I mean, she was disciplinarian, and she used to talk to them like a mother.
Well, I mean, we were like, we got a fair share of that when we were here.
Do you remember, Colin, we went to Ireland for Christmas?
Yes.
You and Reenie and Paudine and I and Chris and
Patty was there too.
Yes, and your mother.
Yes.
And father. And Dottie was in charge of the children. I remember Tommy was here with her. And who else of your family?
Well, all the other kids, Mary, Patrick, and Noreen, they're all here. I was the only one of the...
And Dottie managed though. Now, where would you get... You wouldn't get a woman to do that today.
No. At Christmas time, yeah.
No.
Well, and
I took a lot for granted, you know.
But those were things that we remember. I think all of us, if you asked any one of the kids through that time, would remember that experience wholeheartedly. And the utmost respect for Dottie May. I mean, there was no talk.
I never heard anyone have anything but respect for her. Yeah.
Never. You wouldn't consider it. She wouldn't put up with it.
Yeah, she was Dottie May.
She had a certain presence about her that you just... And she was just a loving and genteel person.
She was lovely and gentle. And you know, when she came to me, the poor thing was... She couldn't read nor write. I remember the kids taught her to write her name. So that if someone came to the door and she had to sign that she could do it. But intelligent... Unbelievable. I remember one time something went out, the washing machine or something in the kitchen. Who do you think fixed it? Dottie May. Something I couldn't do. She was remarkably intelligent for a non-educated poor black woman, and she had faith in God. She was a lovely woman.
You were blessed to have her for sure.
Oh, that was pure luck, Vincent. That was an act of God.
To stick with you through all of that.
God rest her soul.
She was a partner in the family, wasn't she?
She was really a partner. Tara's in touch with her family now to help them whenever she can.
Is she? Yeah.
Looking up for me.
Keep in touch with them. What? So, you and Dottie and Pa Jean raised these 6 girls. Through thick and thin. Were there any like highlights or memories that stick out to you? I mean, obviously you have all your children; they're all beautiful.
I remember
blossoming.
we used to go to San Diego and stay in a hotel, and Dottie would come with us. Oh yes, Vacation Village was a big thing at the time, and Dottie came. We all bunched into the hotel, lovely hotel, and she was there, part of the family. Right. And I mean, there was no such thing as Paugine and I leaving her there for the night or something. We just lived together.
Right.
This was our happy time.
Yeah.
I remember.
Did she enjoy that?
I remember going to Apple Valley with her when Molly was just a baby, and Dottie came with us to Apple Valley. Apple Valley. You don't hear about that today, but it's still there. And San Diego. Oh, it was wonderful.
So the O'Haras. And then my mother was, trying to think now what the timing was. Well, they were here and then moved to Vermont in probably late 60s, mid to late 60s.
Before your mom was married, she decided she would come to her sister.
Right.
And she came when we were living in Pomona. And she was by herself. And I remember she was already teaching school in Ireland, but she took a job in the bank in Pomona. Then it came to our moving to Manhattan Beach. And she made up her mind she had some connection. Emily was here, Pauline's mother was here. And whatever connection she had through Emily and Emily's friends, instead of moving in with us, she didn't want to do that. And she had a job. She was in the bank in Inglewood somewhere or something, someplace like that, where they lived. But we were very, very close.
What was Emily? How did she arrive here? Was she here before? I mean, what?
That's a good point. I forget when she came, but it was decided. Her 2 sons decided that she should come here. That's Bob and Podgy.
Yeah.
So she came.
From Ireland. Foxford.
From Ireland.
Was she in Foxford or Bray at the time? Or no,
she was in Bray at the time. I think. No, she went back to Bray. She was in Foxford. Now, I don't remember her. I do remember picking her up at the airport and driving the kids on. I can still see the drive down the Pacific Coast Highway and coming to my house. But you know, I think that was a return. You know, she was a travelling woman. I think this is after she went back to Ireland when I had come back. But anyway, here she was. To make a long story short, got herself an apartment up here in these fancy apartments in Rolling Hills Estates, not far from where CBS is now.
Mm.
And she had herself a little apartment there. And Pascal was here, and Pascal would come down and stay with her there and visit her and all that. And life was wonderful.
Her family was
Everything
here.
was falling into place.
Yeah, yeah.
And then one day she decided, I've had it, I'm going to go home, I'm going to go back to Ireland.
Really?
So they arranged for her to go to Our Lady's Manor in Hove, which was a retirement place. And that's where she ended her life. She was there 10 years, I think.
Mm.
Because Des McConn's mother was there, and they met. And, of course, while she was here, I should tell you, while the woman was here, she went through 2 major surgeries. She first had cancer of the breast.
Mm.
And I had her enrolled in Kaiser since the time I was working for them. So she had her medical coverage. There was no Medicare then for her.
Mm-hmm.
Then she got colon cancer.
Oh, wow.
Talk about it being in the family.
Right, both sides really, yeah.
And she survived both.
Yeah.
Beautifully.
Yeah.
And I remember she had a friend, an Irish woman by the name of Peg Roach.
Peg Roach, I remember her.
Do you remember
yeah.
Peg Roach?
Yeah.
And they were bound to one another, deep, deep friends.
My mother was close to Peg Roach because as kids
I think she lived near her or something.
In the same apartment building, I think.
same
And Peg
outfit.
Roach was either the apartment manager or something like. There was some connection there. They were neighbors and became very close because when we would visit on the way out of town, we would many times stop and visit Peg Roach.
Yes.
Because she was in Inglewood.
She's kind of part of the family.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Vince. Your mom was very much. I've been kind of skipping through your mom because before she was married, she worked as a. Before she was married, before Colin came, she was a receptionist for these Italian people. Oh, Bob used to know them so well. There's a bank there now at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and Sepulveda, somewhere there, and she was the receptionist. And she was a beautiful young woman, you know, and she didn't really like the job, but it was a job.
Right.
And she was suitable for it. I went home to Ireland after she came here. And she stayed here and I went home. I had Tara with me, nobody else. And I had heard something about your mother and your father having gotten to know one another. And it seemed she had gone to America, and he was still home. I think he was in England. And I had got a whimper, and it was a wrong idea that he had kind of pushed her aside. I had thought, and I remember being very cold to him when I met him in Enniscrone. But actually, that enkindled his desire for her.
Mm. You reminded him of.
I brought her back to his mind.
Right.
And it's shortly thereafter he got himself over to California. His brother Louis was already here, so it wasn't a major accomplishment. It wasn't hard work.
Right.
He got over here, and that was it.
Did you know, because I remember seeing pictures of, it must have been their wedding, where you were in the wedding and Louis was in the wedding. Did you know Louis beforehand?
No.
Yeah, it's amazing you all came from the small little corner of the earth and ended up here.
Louis and Carmel had been living in the house then that Colin and Pat moved to on
Berendo Avenue.
Berendo Avenue. But then I got to know Louis and Carmel quite well before Patsy came because from the wedding.
Right. Well, you're all part of.
The wedding was held in the Los Angeles Air Force Post, which still exists. And the reception, we went down to Long Beach to the headquarters to arrange for the reception. Your aunt, what's your aunt's name? God rest her soul.
Carmel.
No, that's Louis' wife, but your own aunt, the oldest of the family.
Bernie or
Bernie.
Yeah.
Bernie and I went down to
Bernie was out for that.
We went down to make the arrangements and to choose the food we would have and so forth. And the reception was held in in the Los Angeles Air Force plant, whatever you call it, site. And it was lovely, it was beautiful. Jimmy O'Grady officiated. They were happy people.
Those magical times, really.
And they went on where did they go on their honeymoon, Vincent?
I don't know. Pomona?
They went far away, I think. Did they go to Europe that time? No, they didn't.
I don't know. That'd be a question for CJ. So and did you see a lot of each other in those days, or was it
all the time.
Every weekend?
All
probably.
The time.
Yeah. It's been nice. Well, that was your social.
Oh, that was a big social outlet for me. It was an emotional outlet. It was everything.
Right.
She was a sister whom I loved.
Right.
And she loved me.
Yeah.
We were tight together. She was 8 years younger than I, and I had mothered her. And we could sit for hours talking about the same thing over and over.
Well, and you maintained that, I know, because we remember you talking on the phone for hours at a time in the evening, and you could never understand what two people would talk about for that length of time. But it was counsel and sharing and all of that, right?
And then I was so sad when she had picked up and had to go back east because Colin.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because, of course, one of the highlights of my memories was the Christmas in Vermont when you all flew back. We talked about that.
Well, we were so linked together that I barely mentioned it when Padraig said we'll go in the thick of the winter back to Vermont.
It was Christmas time, wasn't it?
Ah, Christmas Eve. We were at Christmas Eve Mass in Chicago, in
Derby Line.
Derby Line. It was warm. It was wonderful. And I remember the kids. I couldn't buy them a whole set of winter clothes, but I bought them something that kept them warm. Oh, it was a happy time, Vincent. And all of you were born at that time. Noreen wasn't. I don't think.
No, Noreen probably was not there. Yeah. Noreen was 1970, and I want to say that was 68. But yeah, we remember the California cousins coming to Vermont, and we couldn't have been more thrilled. Just for whatever reason, there was always a relationship there. You know, there was a certain a bond. You know, and thick as thieves, and just excited to be with one another, and that continued. And that was probably modeling your behavior with my mom, and just seeing that.
Well, you know, as young kids, you and we didn't have to cater to you.
Well, we were all similar ages, and
you catered to one another.
We did, yeah. A few strong-willed personalities. It's amazing nobody ever, worked it all out.
You worked it all out, Vincent, and you weren't spoiled. There was no spoiling. I mean, you weren't indulged in, and you weren't a burden on us.
It was simple.
She never felt you were a burden, and I didn't feel my kids were. Oh, it was a fabulous time. I remember when we were going home, we had to fly up to Canada, Montreal.
Montreal, yeah.
And Vincent, Colin was driving, and we ran into a snowstorm, and it was all, I have just vague remembrance of this. It wasn't easy physically.
Yeah, right. When you think about that crowd and the suitcases, and then piling everybody in a car in the middle of winter, it was.
And I think I had to take time out from my practice to do that.
Well, you must have, yeah. Did you take a lot of vacations? It must have been tough.
We have travelled a lot, Vincent and Colin. We did. The woman next door tells me about her daughter who has been in every continent except Antarctica.
Yeah. Well.
But she travelled as a single woman, and mostly she was like teaching children or taking care of children. She's not really educated. She's a very smart woman though, and very nice lady, but she has no particular profession. Anyway, with me, how did I get into that? Telling you about the neighbours. Oh yes, Weenie was telling me that the other day. Mom, she said you and Dad took time out. One of the first things we ever did was, well, of course, we were going to Ireland fairly regularly, 2 to 3 years, and then we went. I remember I went with the medical group. One of my first big trips was a cruise of the Mediterranean. I remember one time we hooked up with Pat and Colin in Portugal. Mm-hmm. That was a different time. We went on the Mediterranean, we went to Spain. Then all the pediatricians in the world met in New Delhi, India.
Wow. Yeah.
And we flew there, and that took us to Japan and to that other country I don't like, not for political reasons, but it's very standards of decency weren't to my. Of course, I was fairly puritanical at the time.
Mm.
Oh, I remember it so well, and I can say it's on the tip of my tongue, near Japan, and didn't go near. We weren't in Vietnam.
Thailand or no?
Anyway, I remember being in New Delhi, and we were in a hotel in New Delhi one evening, and a crowd came in to entertain, and who should they be? They were from the Philippines, and they were half Irish. They were an Irish band. The priests, the Columban Fathers.
But they're Filipino. Or half?
Yes, they weren't. They were Filipino, but they were trained like Irish people.
Interesting. Small world.
And then we went to South America. So talking about it, at all the continents, we did fairly well.
You did?
We did, and we went to South America. We did go to Australia. With Europe, we had the Baltic and the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean was the first one, then we went to the Baltic. So I can't complain.
Your work?
And you know what, Colin, we would never have been able to do that if it hadn't been for Dottie.
Sure. Well, and you had the means to do it too. You worked hard and you enjoyed the benefits of that, right? I mean, that was part of it. We always look forward to getting gifts from you, Auntie Noreen, because they're always very fashionable and fancy and well thought out clothing. I remember being in Vermont and getting a green denim jacket, like a dungaree jacket, and just loved it.
It was for you.
Yes, and somehow it fit and it was fashionable, and all of us got something that you obviously went out and thought about and pulled it together.
I had time and energy in those days.
Well, you had a knack for doing it. You did it pretty well, and always look forward to those care packages.
How nice of you, Colin, to say that, Vincent.
Oh, well, those are the things that you remember. I mean, you can't make that up.
That.
That's part of our happy childhood. Speaking of happy childhood, we were talking about Porterville, and so those were some of the happiest days in years in our combined lives, our families' lives.
And remember, she'd set up a big dinner for us right there in Porterville. Nothing was half done. It had to be done properly.
Well, it's probably a bit of a competition, I think, between the two of you.
Yes, one didn't want to be anywhere apart from the other as far as standards. I remember one crazy Christmas start, Vincent. Speaking of that stupid Waterford crystal, I say stupid because it's just stuff. You kids were little. You were crawling on the. Well, there weren't that many of you. You were crawling on the floor. No, it was here. You were crawling on the floor in Manhattan Beach. There used to be a movie of you. God knows where these have gone to. You were a little boy, 1 year old, crawling on the floor in Manhattan Beach. But you came down here to this house, this very house. So that had to be.
Well, that would have been Rue Langlois, right? Because that was the early 60s, mid 60s. Had to be.
I remember the.
Because you didn't move into this house until this 1970, right?
That's right. Anyway, here children.
I think you told me the story. I spent my first Christmas in that house down there in Pellsbury.
You did.
Yeah.
That I was thinking Manhattan Beach, but I think it was there.
Yeah,
yes,
it makes sense time-wise. Yeah.
Anyway, we would set up all this finery, which was not for children. It's amazing. Nothing ever got broken. You were well-mannered kids, boys and all.
When did that all change, Auntie Noreen? I don't know.
We got sensible.
Yeah. So we used to do the summer exchanges in Porterville, and those were always kind of fun, and just the stories. It seems like yesterday too, but I just you look back at just such fond memories and the fun that we had with that.
Unforgettable.
And very simple things. I mean, we can go back to Porterville. There's no glamour about it. It's not like you're going somewhere that's really unique and special. It was the people that were there, right? And the
yes, it was ourselves.
The relationships
we ourselves
that we had. But again, I think you and my mother went out of the way to facilitate that.
And then Vincent, we have to admit, Pauline and CJ were special.
They were, no doubt. Yeah.
They picked it right up. There was never any question. I can never hear Colin say, oh, we can't have that, it'll be too many. Or Podgy never saying to me, oh, the Harris, our house. It was, we were in outreach of one another.
Well, I think a couple things that, well, you were obviously my mother's sister, and there's an immense amount of respect, older sister, but that my dad saw Pajin as an older brother, as a mentor, as somebody who helped, was just amazingly loving and giving person.
Beautiful to come. Yeah. Couldn't have been more beautiful.
Just advice and showing the way,
Colin,
generous and all.
Something I have to stop on for a minute because I regret it so. When your dear mom passed away, we had been separate. We had been distanced from one another geographically. So it wasn't like I was as dependent on her as early years, where I could call her at any moment and look forward to going up next month and all of that. But after she died, I thought to myself, I didn't act on it. For one thing, I wasn't really as aware as I should have been of your loss, the poignancy of it, her leaving you at the time she did, and your poor dad. Yeah. We have to think about how that worked out.
Well, retrospect's always a great guide to these things. You have a different perspective of it. When you're in the middle of it, it's difficult to know and understand because you were dealing with your own emotional part of it and your processing of it. I'll never forget, you were up there and Tommy and I, and you were in the car driving back after visiting her. We must have been at the hospital, and you telling us stories about the red velvet dress and how you remembered just certain things that we were so in awe of you remembering that detail. And we've talked about this, is that you had as much pain as we did in that process.
Yes.
From a different perspective, but not a different pain, really.
No, it was painful.
So we all had our part in that. And of course, you can look back at it, and time gives you a little bit of a friendlier view of it. I think
it softens it.
It does, yeah. In many ways, we were lucky that there wasn't a lot of fence mending that had to go on, reconciliation,
none of that.
Any real work to get done. And
the one thing was, after she was gone, your dad was here, and most of you were here.
Right.
In California, that is.
Well, he was lucky to have my sisters. I called to tell him after we found out Paulette was pregnant, and we had an ultrasound, and it was a very high-level ultrasound.
Your child, yeah.
Yeah, Katie. And so I called him, and we knew it was going to be a girl, so I called to tell him that we were going to have another daughter. And he said, oh, that's great, congratulations. Let me tell you something, there's nothing like having daughters. And as he was saying that, he caught himself saying this. Remember, he said it to his son. But what he was saying was, the story was that when my mother died, that Noreen and Mary filled that void, that female void. They stepped in and took that nurturing role and really helped him through that.
Of course they did.
That first year especially. And again, we didn't have that. I didn't have that perspective.
No.
I wasn't there. I did. I guess I saw it, but I didn't.
And you had other. Your own life was.
But back to your point that we all have our different perspectives, and
you can't be expected to be thinking something that you should be thinking of at the time. You have to adjust to the time phrase.
Well, look, if I could do things over, let me ask you, if you had to do anything over again, would you do it? And would you do it differently?
I doubt it. I doubt I'd have the capability to do. I could probably have done it better. I could have improved situation, but I doubt if I would have had the. Looking back, I don't think I could have done anything differently.
Right. Well, it's like anything else. You do the best you can with what you have. I think by all measures, you'd consider it successful, really, Raise a big family and get everybody through college. I mean, I think, how do you measure success in life? It's really difficult, and it's a moving target.
It's a moving target.
We talk about trying to be happy every day, and as the lady said, one of the psychologists we were talking to, she said, I don't prescribe or subscribe to happiness as being the goal, just to be satisfied, is more something that is obtainable. Happiness is up to each individual.
Yes, and
right.
it can be measured in different ways.
In different ways, and different comes and goes at different times. I think we have high expectations that it's just going to be great all the time, and we all know that's not the case. Were you ever, I was just thinking again about how you dealt with all of the challenges in your life and how you dealt with that stress. You had the spiritual, would you say that was the biggest thing that you leaned on? I mean, your faith, and that God would get you through,
you know,
and will get you through it.
I'm not that saintly that I thought of it every day as that. I was blessed with the abilities to think that my work ethic was good. Do your best.
Yeah.
You can't be asked to do any more. That was the point I started out from. But I always did have deep faith. And
well, what about the Dames of Malta? How did that play into your life?
Well, that's another story, isn't it?
But that's a big deal.
It was. It was nice to be invited to join the Order of Malta, and I went through it, and it was lovely, and I met nice people, and I admired what they did. But there's a certain elitism to it, of course, you know, as there is to many things that are well-meaning, you know.
Right.
I mean, some people get to be, you know, in charge of a lot of things, and their name is well-known and that kind of thing. And others are just kind of the general public, so to speak, and do the work. I used to work down at the Little Sisters of the Poor as part of my obligation, and I worked at our hospital, the Order of Malta Hospital in LA, for about 5 years. In fact, I took the kids down there once in a while, Reenie anyway, as a nurse. And then it got to be, and I was still working in my office, you know.
Mm.
But after I stopped my practice, I did more of that work.
Mm.
But then it got to be.
How old were you when you were retired?
74 or 5.
You had a long career.
I did. My partner, who was a China woman, she decided to leave. I was 5 years on my own. That wasn't easy, you know, answering the phone at night all the time.
Yeah.
Not that I'd get that many calls, but I'd get calls at night. She left. She decided to retire, and I stayed on for another 5 years. That was probably a hard 5 years. I'm trying to think. I know I was well in my 70s.
Yeah. What motivated you to stick with it? Was it the money, or just the work, or
I had nothing else to do.
Yeah.
You
Well, and you enjoyed the work, right? It was part of your life.
Yeah. And after I retired, I often thought I could easily have stayed on a little longer.
Yeah.
You know, without being too pressured, and I would have enjoyed it. I think that especially when I run into people on the street here or in church, who tell me, "Oh, you were my pediatrician. She's now a grandmother."
Right.
The lady that serves us at CVS, Judy. I said to Reenie, that girl broke her collarbone when she was 13. She's now, tells me she's her 3rd grandchild.
Wow. That gives you a perspective, doesn't it? But you remembered her. Well, you were a doctor to a lot of kids up here, weren't you?
Yeah, there was a lot of kids. When I moved on the hill, that was it.
Well, I have a question for you. Did you ever get, what kind of advice did you get from your mother that would you remember? Was there anything that she instilled in you that you still can hang on to this day?
There were a lot of superficial things and deep things.
Yeah.
She, I remember one thing which is kind of superficial, but it's meaningful. She always said to me, don't say things about your family or your friends to somebody, because she said it'll come back to you. You know, these are not, I'm not verbalizing it very well, and she probably didn't either. But she put me wise to the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
She was wise beyond her little country perspective.
And stuff like that. And of course she encouraged hard work. I mean, why would I come home from school and say, I got first in the class today? She told me I was to say that when I was like 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
I got first today. That had to be given to me too, that desire.
Sure.
I came first is what I used to say. Because she'd repeat it to me. And of course behaviour was everything. You didn't just have to, just working wasn't enough. You had to behave properly.
Dress properly and act a certain
I remember
way.
my father telling me once I went to Galway to the university, he said, you must never ignore anybody you meet on the street. He gave me the word that, humility.
Right.
Don't think you're better than other people.
Well, there's a few people in our world in these days that could use a little bit of that, right? I mean, it's good advice. Serves you well. If you could go back to any age in your life looking at it, is there a particular time you would go back to? That's a tough one, isn't it?
It would have to do with my being here with your family and my...
Yeah.
It would have to be somewhere in there, I think. The other was, some of it was great and good, but that was a passing phase.
Mm-hmm.
See, there's nothing like family. I remember lovely times during my times at the hospital. I'd have good times with the other doctors and things like that. But that was passing, and you knew it was passing.
Right. So the most joy really was about raising your family, having your children, and having the relationships with your outward family, whether it was your relatives in Ireland or your
mostly my relatives here.
Right.
Your mother, and that was a big part of my life, because I remember we started out here together young, in our 20s.
When you look at it, do you look at it as going so fast, or how do you measure that time?
Not like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the perspective. You wonder, as we all travel life, and they say, oh, it just gets faster and faster, and you're in it, and you're busy, and you don't think about it, right? This is the time we have. And you look back at it and you think, oh, maybe if you could capture it and bottle it, you would, right?
Yes,
Wouldn't that be
exactly
great?
right.
Yeah.
But you can't do that.
Yeah, it's hard to re-engineer it or redo it, right? You can't force things like that to happen, right? It's an organic part of the evolution. And
you hate to say should have. You don't want to have any should have. Of going too far back. I mean, there's always something we should have done differently an hour ago.
Right.
Or a day ago, but not...
Well, if I could do everything twice, I'd be pretty good at a lot of things, right? But it doesn't work that way.
No.
You
deal with what's in front of you.
Yeah. Well, I think, too, we have to count our blessings and have that humility, right? It's good to hear that from my grandfather, that's where that comes from. You have to have that.
I like that virtue.
Yeah, you have to have it. And be reminded of it every once in a while, especially in this world, the way it goes.
Exactly. It's necessary today to keep your senses.
How does that song go, Arrivederci Roma?
Not funny.
How does it go?
Arrivederci Roma, it's time to say goodbye. Arrivederci Roma. Lovely song. I forget who, there was one singer.
Yeah, well, I'll look it up, but
you can look it up.
It's amazing that, well, I wrote it down here, that's why I thought, but that was the song that reminded you of that.
That night when I was sitting I was taking care of a baby actually that I had to hand over, a sick child that I had to hand over to the next doctor. I was in the hospital to the minute I got in the car to drive away.
To leave.
Because we had apartments nearby for the hospital, so I just had to walk, It isn't as if I had to go into town or something. Arrivederci, that's goodbye in Italian.
Yeah, it's beautiful. How that stuck with you. If you had one or two things that you would want your children to remember about you or your grandchildren, what would it be?
That's a good question, Colin. You don't want them to remember the bad things, and you don't want to boast about good things. Well, I would always like to think that the people who come after me would say to themselves, I had a grandmother who was hardworking.
Yeah.
Or I had a grandmother who didn't think too much about herself.
Mm-hmm.
Or Or I had a grandmother who loved my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
I had a grandmother who was always true to her Irish heritage. What am I not? What am I
No,
leaving?
I think you got. I think you got. I mean, from my perspective, to look at your relationship with Pa Jean, your relationship with your home country. Those were things that were instilled in all of us growing up, that we could see as models for behavior, and certainly are the legacy. You know, that's worth something to me. You know, we all need role models in our lives, right? And somebody to
even if we don't realize it, we are.
Somebody has to set the path,
the standard, yeah,
and the standard, and you did that at a very high level. You know, you're the matriarch of our family.
Well, as of now.
Well, as of now, and you always have been. Do you know that?
Well, I was thinking after I leave, there'll be your Mary and Tara, and they'll be the women leaders. Mary is a great leader. She's a wonderful niece.
Well, but that's part of your legacy too, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because
not to mention yourself.
She got that from, well, we're talking about matriarchs, and she got that from who? My mother.
From her mother.
And you. Because my mother got that from you.
Yeah, she did. She always did look at what I was doing, and yeah, I know that I know I didn't misguide her. Let me put it that way.
Well, and I think that you have to have a predisposition to carry on those roles too. It's not for everybody.
Yeah.
Right? You were the leader. You blazed the trails. And we always respected you for that.
Yeah, your father did, and he still does.
Well, there's reason for that, really.
Well, you know, you don't always choose the position you find yourself in, but you have to go with it and do the best.
Right.
And it's really no compliment to you. That's where God put you. You know, I didn't choose to be the leader, as it were. But I was the first to come here, of course. There's that you can't get away from.
Well, yeah, but yeah.
I have to think, though, Colin, that so much that I did, I would never have done if I hadn't had a man like Patrick McGuinness.
Mm.
You know, he was so supportive and always so positive.
Well, he was very much a progressive. Liberal-minded man, you know.
And he was one of the first feminists.
That's what I was getting to, is that he empowered you to do what you did, which if you didn't have him, there wasn't many like him, right, that would allow that to happen.
Yeah, I remember when he died, somebody made that comment after his funeral. I think Tara must have mentioned it in the little pamphlets or something. She said there weren't many feminists that would say they were feminist back in the 60s, 70s. They wouldn't admit it. Right. Many men wouldn't. They would not, even if they were feminist, they wouldn't want to admit it for some reason. It wasn't popular.
No, and I would think probably even more so coming from Ireland, where there was just very strict roles and everybody did.
But you know, it wasn't hard, really. People would say to me about your medical school and everything. Women were accepted in Ireland in my time more than they were in this country. There were several women in my medical school class.
There were. Well,
almost half and half.
Now it's half and half. Or it was half and half then?
Almost half and half. It was close to it.
What do you think about the state of healthcare here in 2017?
Colin, you know, I'm a little bit one-sided. I mean, not everybody believes this, but I'm all for universal coverage, single payer. Mm-hmm. I saw it operating in Europe. I remember, I always remember this little scene when remember now I'm 25 years old, and I'm not an American 25, I was Irish 25, and the equivalency of not intelligence, but my
education,
and not even education, but my
experience.
and not even experience my development psychologically would be more like that of a much younger person in America. You know, people of 25 were considered old sometimes. You know, you were all. But I remember there was a man. I'm 25. I'm newly in America. This is in Chicago, and this little man was very sick. And I remember the doctor in charge, who was an Irish, not from Ireland, but he had an Irish name, saying to him, "You were at the pearly gates last night, but we got you back from there." And I remember the man had come from New York and had spent a fortune on his health. And I remember thinking, I had just left England, you see, and I had heard and seen the operation of the single payer. And we used to go see a man, this Ogilvy, the Scotsman I referred to him earlier, he was paid by the government of England to have a car for me, but I couldn't drive a car. I was an Irish, know nothing. And he took the money for the car, but I used to have to ride with him. And he would drop me off to make a visit just to somebody, make a house call. Mm-hmm. And here I am, this kid, you know, from Ireland. And funny enough, he had before me an Irish doctor from Dublin. But there was a night and day difference between this lady from Dublin and this lady from Mayo. Mm-hmm. Anyway, this man owned a steel mill. And he was such a Republican that he wouldn't have anything to do with the National Health Service. And he used to pay a half a crown for the visit. Half a crown. 2 and 6 pence.
For the house call.
Yeah. But the sick little old man in St. Joe's, I remember having said that he had lost all his money trying to protect his health up to now. See, the healthcare was just coming in. So that's why I am totally for universal coverage. And I don't see why this country, with all the countries in the world that have it, why we can't have it in America.
Well, it's a big business, and people would have to give up their power and money. It's 20% of the economy. People aren't going to give up any of it.
We're not willing, you see. We're not willing to. No. But you don't hear many people say that. You do. You hear every once in a while that every major country in the world has universal health coverage. Why don't we? England, France, Germany.
Well, because it's then a government-run program. Right? Can't have that.
Yeah.
It's political and it's financial ultimately.
Oh, yeah.
You know, money.
Oh, yeah.
Just follow the money, right? You look at the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies. None of them are hurting.
Absolutely
They're complaining about Obamacare, of course, but now we're getting political, Auntie Noreen.
We are. We're going a little, yeah.
If you won $1 million tonight, what would you do other than take me out to dinner, which you're going to do anyway, I think.
I am. If I were to win $1 million, I'd put it in my dwindling family account.
You wouldn't give it away? You wouldn't have a big party?
No. No, I wouldn't have a big party. I might consider charity. I think I get letters back thanking me, and I think, why did I send those people money?
Yeah.
You know, little money. I don't make big things, but I do contribute to charity, and as I say, I get letters of thanks, and I think, did I send them money?
Yeah.
And I have to watch the mail because I get food for the poor all the time. Then I look and I see that I've already contributed twice to food for the poor in the 1 year.
Well, it's not a bad mistake to make, is it?
It's not a bad mistake.
Somehow we forget about the people who need it more than we do, that's for sure.
I have to tell you a cute story, Vincent. This is a true story.
Yeah.
I was in the Bullocks. Is the Bullocks still here? I think it is.
No, they're long gone. Bullocks
from Delamo.
Yeah, no, they're not there anymore.
Oh, it's Macy's now.
Macy's, yeah.
Maybe it was even Macy's then. Anyway, there was a big sale on expensive handbags. And because there was a sale on, I decided to buy 2. One I have to this day, and the other I remember I think I gave a present to Maura. Well, it turned out that it was very costly. I mean, for me, I wasn't a big spender, but this was like, there was $400 involved. Well, the bill came the next month. It wasn't on the bill, like this thing we're dealing with now. The next month came, wasn't on the bill. When it didn't come after 3 months, I called them up. I said, I owe you money, but you're not billing me for it. So they listened to me and said, oh, well, we have no evidence. We really don't think so. I kept calling, and finally I was talking to a guy in India. No, he said, you don't owe us any money. There's no evidence of you owing us any money. And I said, did you ever hear of something called conscience? You know, but he didn't know what I was saying. I said to him, see, I think I do owe you. In fact, I'm sure I owe you. Anyway, he told me, drop it. You're only confusing, you're only making trouble. Just drop it. So, of course, I didn't have much to tell at confession. So I told it to the now bishop, the Irishman, what's his name, who was made bishop with the last group.
Mahoney.
Oh, I know him well. He'll come to me. Irish name. One of the guy writes in the tidings. It'll come back to me. Anyway, that's all I tell him. I said, what do I do about a situation like this? He says, give it to the church. This is good 5 years ago. I walked out there and I said, well, I'm already giving it to the church. Yeah. Although we never contributed to the new church. Podgy wouldn't. Podgy could say mean things that he didn't really mean. He said here once in front of Warwick Loftus, if she contributes to this new church, I would walk away. He just thought it was a wild idea that there was so much necessary besides having a big fancy church. Yeah. That's a different subject. Yeah. Anyway, 5 years ago, Bishop told me, and he's a singer. I'm sure you know him. He was in San Pedro. He has a beautiful voice. It'll come to me. Anyway, for 5 years I was thinking, but lately I got to thinking, well, you know, if I'm going to be leaving here, I wouldn't want to have that $400 on my mind. So what did I do? About a week ago, I sent the $400 check to the new church. Get it off my plate. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to be on. That's not on here, is it?
Is that your Irish guilt, Catholic guilt? Yeah.
Well, it's. To tell you the truth, I thought I owed it. You know.
Yeah.
I wasn't satisfied that I was free and clear.
Right. Well, to me, it's found money. You just need to pass it on, right? What are you going to do with it? Give it to somebody, right? You benefited from whatever you got, and so you probably felt a lot better for having, like you said, having a clear conscience. Now, I'm just wondering if it was 4,000, would you have done the same thing?
I wouldn't have allowed. The 4,000 would never have gotten by.
Right. How about 40?
I would probably ignore it.
See, it's conditional. There has to be a certain value, right?
Although, I remember thinking the time, you know what I thought that night when that man said to me, give it to the church. I thought, why did I ever mention it to him?
Yeah.
What business had I telling him? And who did God give him the power to say that to me?
Well, you were looking, you wanted to be honest and confess it and put it out there, right?
I was just looking for an excuse. I could have done that without going to talking about it in confession. I really hadn't committed a sin. Oh, it's just crazy.
No, but you were thinking about it. You're still thinking about it.
I'm still thinking about it.
Well, would you say your house is in order these days? I mean, how do you feel about it?
Oh, I do. I feel comfortable.
Yeah.
When we get when we get that straightened up.
Yeah.
The ladies keep it up for me a little bit. I'm just, you know, the question is how long. I'll get the electrician to sort out some of these cords.
You know, Podgin said to my dad, when he was sick, it was towards the end of his life, that he was satisfied with his life.
Did he say that?
Yeah. Which, to me, was powerful. And that also he respected my dad enough to say that to him.
You respected your dad a lot. And it was mutual.
It was, but what a great thing to be able to say too, you know. I think, it was shortly before he died, but
when he knew his death was imminent.
He knew, yeah. He knew. And why wouldn't he be? I mean, it was. You would say the same thing, wouldn't you?
I would.
Yeah. You know, it goes by and it's such a flash, even, you know, when I look at some of the things that you look at, and you look at history and people walking down the street and how many millions have done it before you, and then you start wondering how insignificant we all are in the scheme of it, you know.
You know, I often think, Colin, when I was a child in Foxford, I knew everybody in the town, right. even as a child, because it was a small town.
Sure.
And even if I didn't know them, to say hello to them or shake their, even as a child, but you just knew the people. Now, I don't know, there's nobody there that anybody knows.
Yeah.
Not even the people who live there know them. You see, unlike you lived in a little different environment. Yours was a smaller. Oh, I mean, your dad's.
Yeah, but he goes back. He wouldn't know anybody there now either.
You probably wouldn't.
He wouldn't. I remember going to a church Sunday, and all the old guys were standing out. This was within the last 10 years, and I said, "Oh, did you know Colin O'Hara?" And they said, "Nah, you know, they maybe, but people forget, you know."
Yes.
Out of sight, out of mind, and you're moving on with your life.
They get on with the newest thing.
It's we all live our own lives in our own little space. Can be dangerous in between our own ears sometimes, you know. Trying to sort it all out.
We do the best we can, and sometimes the best is not enough, but we still do the best we can.
Well, look, we've all had our challenges, and you have your challenges, and you know, you always say, well, you want your health and you want your kids to be healthy, and when you don't have that, that's a heavy burden, right? That's the heaviest burden probably for a parent to have to carry, and yet, what do you have to lean on in those situations? You know, if it was a matter of anything other than faith, it'd drive you crazy.
You have a good faith, Vincent.
Well, I do, but
you have a strong faith.
I think it's always kind of changing too, you know. And
there are days and hours when sometimes your faith is weaker at one time than another, and that's normal. Yeah. We're human.
Right. Well, it's a day-to-day condition sometimes, you know. But I said it to Podgy, and I think you were sitting there. It was right around the 4th of July, and he was in pain. I remember him, and just him standing up and telling stories, and just to get his point across. Always the dramatic, and to emphasize the point. But how lucky we were to have come from where we came from. Have come from where you came from. And to be sitting here in the hill of California, overlooking the Pacific Ocean with the sunset.
He appreciated that. He did. Well, and a lot of people do not.
It was profound to me.
It was profound.
Because billions of people dream about it. Maybe not billions, but millions certainly do.
I remember a cute little incident one time when his mother Emily was here, when she was first here, and we were sitting over at the other house. And we were sitting around, I forget now who all were there. Possibly, maybe not Loftus, but somebody of that ilk. I mean, somebody who could appreciate it. And we were sitting around, and she said in her innocent little way, well, it's just like Foxford. Mm. You know, here we're sitting on the brink of the Pacific Ocean. And I remember her saying in her cute little way, this is just like Foxford. And of course, we were laughing at her.
Because of the people that it was just
just because of the environment. But, you know, it was so unlike Foxford, is what we thought.
Right.
But she meant that the people were together.
Yeah.
And that part was lovely.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that it was such a dream come true, really, when you look at it, and what you built here, and your family, and all of that. And we were lucky to share in it, and are lucky to share in it. And Paulette says, you know, imagine if your mother and father had never met. Okay, these are all hypotheticals, or had never left Ireland. You'd still be in Foxford, or you know, we're in Ireland. You know, so imagine that path in life, and yet the path we have. And so you wonder about the destiny and the path that's
and the part God has to play in all this.
I think there's a lot to that, and how you know, how the little messages come in. And guide you along the way.
You know, I'm in touch with a nun now. She's my age exactly, born the same year. She's a few months older than I. She was with me in Bal, which the high school was it 6 years or 5, Porrick? I went there when I was 13 and I left there when I was 18. It was 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
Yes, I think it was from September until June of 5 years. And we were together. She sat behind me, and her name was Peggy Eaton, and she was from Westport. And it turned out that her brother, whom we didn't know at the time, he had been editor of the Mayo News, and then he decided to go back to college, and he was a poet, and he was a lovely guy, but he had a little odd look about him. I hate to interject that because it's not important, but it is. And he was older, and so the kids in college kind of laughed at him a little bit, even though he was so much smarter than they were. One time he never went to college, mind you, and the note was put up in the quad down in the entrance to the university. James Joyce, Genius or Madman by Alec Eaton. And some smart guy went up and changed it to Alec Eaton, James, what was it?
Genius
or Madman.
Yeah.
And Pauline became one of his great friends. This happened, they were on the same gigs.
Mm.
And of course, this is long after the high school routine. But then when I met Peggy out here, we talked about it again and about my husband and her brother. And he died in the classroom teaching high school.
Wow.
He got his degree, and he taught the professor's children, gave them, as we used to call them, grinds. You know, a tutor was a grind. Are you getting a grind? And he was the one giving the grinds. And anyway, he did die in his 50s. And every time we visited Ireland, we visited him. We were that close.
Yeah, wow.
But anyway, she's in touch with me now. She's a breast cancer survivor. She's a melanoma survivor. And I think she has melanoma again.
Mm.
Because she's going to the oncologist now. But she calls me regularly. I said, can't I call you, Peggy? Well, she said, the problem is that I don't know who would answer. There's nobody here, she says, but me and another nun who's 100 and something.
Hmm.
She was still getting up on the morning mass doing the lecturing the last time I talked to her. That's an interesting story in itself.
You've been phenomenally blessed with health. Have you ever had any ill health or any?
I was, after my first year in Galway, after my pre-med year, I got a pleural effusion fluid on the lung.
Mm.
It was probably related to tuberculosis because everyone in Ireland had TB, you know.
Mm.
Maybe not active, but my right cavity, I remember going to the doctor in the university before I came home to tell him that I had this awful heart, couldn't breathe. And he said to me, you have pleural effusion. But even in those days, they didn't know how to really test for it. So I was just put at rest at Castlebar Hospital. But I was there 4 solid weeks.
Really?
And nothing ever came of it. They didn't really ever find out what it was due to. I didn't know. I mean, I was just 18 years old.
Yeah.
And then Marty had the same thing. He was at St. Vincent's in Dublin.
Really? Huh. And they never really...
No,
really
in those days they
figure it out.
didn't. But they say that everyone in Ireland got it. A touch.
Some form or another, yeah.
Which made you immune to it.
Well, listen, let's take a break, and then why don't you...
Is all this on tape, Vince?
Of course.
Very casual, but very nice.
Let's hear Arriva Derci Roma. Take us out with that. How does it go again? Arriva.
Let's see if I could thumb it out of the old piano.
You got it?
Well, I can do it from my head if I don't break my...
Take your time.
Vincent.
Yeah.
The girls should be here.
They're coming.
Right?
Yep. All right. Here we are, May 2017. Arriva Derci Roma.
Do you recall the melody a little bit?
Yes, it's beautiful. Lovely.